Welcome to Industry X.0 Unplugged, the podcast exploring industrial innovation's ever-changing world. Join hosts Patrick, Ella, and Glenn as we push the limits from X equals 4 to 5 on this exciting journey through our industry's technical revolution. Every episode features engaging conversations, expert interviews, and deep dives into the coolest parts of the industry. For engineers and forward thinkers, X is all about innovation and progress. We explore the future of industry, from AI and IoT to robotics and beyond. Industry X.0 Unplugged also covers sustainable practices, ethical debates, and celebrates Industry X.0 pioneers. Stay ahead in the fast-paced tech world with insights into what's hot and what's next in Australia and beyond. Join us as we explore cutting-edge innovations and inspiring stories driving automation, control, and the Internet of Things.
Hi, welcome to Industry X.0 Unplugged. Pat, this is really exciting.
Well, thanks, Ella. And those were the dulcet tones of Ella Everall-Russell, who will be joining us every week to keep us on track, to be quite honest, because when you get a bunch of nerds in a room, you never know where things might lead. So, exciting. This is our first recording at WOTSO, and WOTSO have kindly donated this recording space for us for our first session. And also thank you to Glenn Leishman, our sound man. When he's not playing in a band, he's recording podcasts.
Anyway, so Pat, what's our focus today?
Well, we've got a special guest here today. Today we're going to delve into the concept of money left on the table within the realm of Industry 4.0.
Right.
So we'll be exploring how businesses can leverage technology to seize overlooked opportunities and maximize their potential for growth.
Okay.
Join us as we navigate the dynamic landscape of 4.0, unraveling its stages of maturity and deciphering what they signify to businesses worldwide. I had to read that, so there was a bit of struggle with that.
There's lots of words. So we're trying to sound very technical here, aren't we?
I think, I know. Sound so
super intelligent. Oh, I'm professional as well. Okay, so who have we got on the show?
So today we are very privileged, as far as I'm concerned, to have somebody that I met only fairly recently myself, but I feel like I've already created a strong bond with, because we share lots of common interests, both in our industry and outside our industry. So today we've got somebody who's not only a keynote speaker, but an expert in crafting robust system architectures that leverage both practices to create stable and integrated landscapes. So introducing John Broadbent, who's pivotal in driving Industry 4.0 innovation in Australasia. His mission, from my point of view, is to empower local manufacturers and producers and equip them with the tools they need to complete and thrive on a global scale. So when I first met John, I could immediately feel the same passion that I have for manufacturing in Australia, and really wanting to see that come back and then thrive, of course.
Yeah, I agree.
So we got on that level very, very quickly. So, John Broadbent, welcome.
Welcome, John. Thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thank you, and being a special guest on your inaugural podcast.
It's the inaugural. Yes, John has more experience in podcasts than we do. So.
Oh, that's relief. You take over from here. Thanks, John.
Yeah, thanks, John. Take it away. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself to start with.
Well, originally, surprisingly, a mechanical engineer by profession. There's a fist pump.
Fist pump from our technical sound engineer.
And during my early engineering career, we didn't have the money in the factory that I was working with to do electrical work in terms of programming, and PLCs were just emerging. So I fancied myself as a bit of a programmer and started from the ground up with little shoeboxes and taught my way all the way to distributed control systems, and found that was far more interesting than mechanical engineering.
Yes.
And then in 87 went out on my own to do PLC programming, founded a business in 95 that became a blue chip automation supply business to multiple companies around Australia. But our specialty, I guess, from 2000 on was integrating SAP with factory floor. and we did a huge amount of projects in Australia and some overseas. But for me, the clincher as to how I got started in this space, in the smart factory space, was in 1996 when I was given the opportunity to write not only the PLC code but also the SCADA for an entire factory in Thailand, which was state-of-the-art at the time. And so for me to be able to see the benefits of making a factory smart way before Industry 4.0. And then in 2011, I was part of the factory build team to build Coca-Cola Euro-Pacific Partners Eastern Creek injection moulding facility here in Sydney. That was almost a lights-out factory. Sort of 5 or 6 people run the entire factory floor. There's more people upstairs in the office than down in the factory, but that was my first real experience at creating a fully integrated smart factory. AGVs, automated guided vehicles, and we used what's called a hub-and-spoke architecture, where we had a central hub with which all the external systems would connect. Mm-hmm. Part of the challenge was that we only had 6 months to build the place from go to woe. It was incredibly tight time frame.
Back in the day especially.
2 weeks after we got power, the next day after we got power, we got IT, and 2 weeks after that, the factory went live. So a lot of work had gone on behind the scenes in the solution architecture to make sure that vendors from Italy, US, Germany, Husky in Canada, local Australian businesses, that their technology sets were going to be compliant with what we wanted, so that when they arrived, we could effectively plug in their systems to our network, and all the data blocks and everything that we needed were going to be there for us to read and write. I mean, it worked like an absolute charm, and to this day, nearly 13 years on, it's still a showpiece.
Amazing.
Yeah. Actually, a side podcast on this would be how security back in the day with IT would compare to today's IT getting in the way sometimes in what we're trying to achieve as engineers and efficiencies in the factory, and then IT saying, no, you can't do that, and having actual, a close working relationship with IT as well, instead of it being a loggerheads.
Yeah, I have a mission statement for any IT people out there in manufacturing, and it's 4 words: deliver stability, enable innovation.
Okay.
Very good.
And I believe IT's role is to provide the systems and platforms, cybersecurity and everything, firewalls, switches, everything that we need to do the job that we need to do. But I don't see why they get in the way. In fact, there's an article going out in 10 minutes on LinkedIn about that exact topic, and the need for partnership, not only internally but externally, for integrated system vendors. And the challenge there is for IT and OT to kiss and make up and realise they work for the same company.
Yes, and that's, I think, different companies seem to have different dynamics in that thing, and when the people work together well, it's beautiful. And I think that's what you see in Europe a lot more. You see, actual working togetherness, knowing that it's important. In the end, it's important that the company manufactures what it's manufacturing, not that it's so stifled that it can't do anything.
And we've seen examples of that.
Yes.
Can I ask a question, John? In regards to that article that's going out on LinkedIn, where is that, so we can put that in our show notes?
Yes, good idea.
It'll be published at 3 o'clock today on my profile.
On your profile? Okay, we'll put that in the show notes.
It's a scheduled post for 3 o'clock on Tuesday. So
brilliant. It'll be very insightful, and I'll look forward to reading that as well later on.
Fantastic. Right. So I guess one of the questions would be, your mission is obviously to educate the manufacturing sector by sharing smart factory concepts. Can you give us a bit of a high-level overview on how you see Industry 4.0 and the digital transformation impacting the Australian manufacturing industry?
I read recently that in Germany, I think it was estimated by Siemens that only 4% of German manufacturing, where Industry 4 came from as a term, that only 4% of German manufacturing is embracing and on that journey. In Australia, I'd say it's less than 1%. There are very, very few companies here who are picking it up and run with it. And part of the reason for that is there is so much hype out in the marketplace, and sadly many system vendors, I'd call them, out there trying to sell their wares. For me, what I'm seeing in organisations is that systems themselves are the last decision that the organisation needs to make. And where the biggest challenge is at the moment is, firstly, a lack of education, which is why I do what I do in terms of the education role. What is Industry 4?
Yes, I think that's very important. It seems to be this buzzword that everybody talks about, but nobody fully understands what it is.
And what isn't it?
Yes.
Because there's a lot of misperceptions around Industry 4.0, but it's also the whole concept of digital transformation and what it means. And organisations at the moment, a large majority, are dragging the chain because they're afraid of what they don't know, rather than embracing education and learning what it is that they could do to improve their functionality within their organisations. And the reason we talked before about money being left on the table is that if organisations, particularly CFOs, knew how much money was being left behind, I think they'd need defibrillators in every CFO's office, because there is a huge amount of money being left on the table. Sadly, a lot of organisations produce to standards in the sense of a standard cost model. Rarely do they look at that standard cost model and see where it's fat and what can we take out of it. And the classic example of that in a smart factory that I helped build in 2014-15 was that their primary focus was on labour reduction. But they had $60 million in their cost of goods, 15% of which was waste, which is $9 million. Pick up 10% of that and you save $900,000, which is far easier to grab than just saving 3 people. So often organisations are focusing on the wrong things, and the inefficiencies are built into their standard cost model. And we've seen that also in the fact that when opportunity presented itself for Australia to offshore, what we really did was we offshored our inefficiency. So we couldn't compete locally with ageing equipment. So we took our 1980s, 1990s kit and we moved it to, say, a lower cost base like Malaysia or China or whatever it was. And I know several companies who exported their inefficiency to Thailand and Malaysia. And then labour rates started to increase. And I wrote an article a couple of years ago called Time to Pay the Piper, which was picked up by the Australian Manufacturing Forum, because if you think about those organisations that exported their inefficiency, when COVID hit and their supply chains got broken, they now couldn't make locally because they no longer had the equipment, they no longer had the space, and etc. So what happens now is an organisation who wants to reshore now has to buy land, has to build a building, has to buy capital equipment that's new and modern, has to find staff, has to train those staff, then has to make product locally. So organisations that offshored offshored part of their production can bring that back. But organisations that did a wholesale offshoring are now really in trouble.
Yeah, and I think the offshoring that at the time they were doing was just to save on labour in their mind, probably. And as you say, the inefficiencies they were having here were just being moved somewhere else, as opposed to picking up whole new concepts of ways of doing things.
And the Coca-Cola example is a classic case where the world cost for PET and HDPE, the two polymers that they use, is pretty well standard. The world cost for equipment to make that stuff is pretty well standard. So the only cost you can save is really the labour component. So by using minimal labour here and making it almost lights out factory, a dark factory as they call it, or a smart factory, means that they can compete globally. And in fact, the factory in Western Sydney manufactures for Australia, New Zealand and up into Southeast Asia as well. So it shows that when we do it well, we can be highly competitive.
I was very lucky. I used to work at Fish and Paykel in New Zealand, and I loved seeing the fact that they would manufacture at a batch size of 1 to order, and those products would be loaded pretty much straight onto a truck at the end and would go to where they were supposed to go to. So there was no warehousing. And I look around here, some of the people we work with, and you just walk around and just see stacks and stacks of money sitting there. And that's how I've been taught to look at it. You say, oh, there's just, 20 products that are worth, a few $1,000s each just sitting here. And there's whole yards full of them half the time. So,
well, I ran a survey late last year on LinkedIn as to who thought what percentage of Australian manufacturing was made on already fully depreciated kit. I reckon it's up in the 80s. The large majority of what I see out of manufacturing is already being made on old equipment. And I think of all the respondents, 75% believed it was over 50% of Australia's production was made on already depreciated kit. So we're trying to sweat the assets to the point that they're dripping.
Yes.
And then we wonder why we're not competitive.
Yeah. And that was the interesting thing about Fish and Paykel. They would build their own manufacturing equipment to suit this kind of philosophy of just-in-time, made-to-order products. And, it was just, to me, that was a really good example of a very small country with a small company doing something very smart that I would love. That's always been my background as what I want to promote here to people that I work with. So, yeah.
And the food and beverage here is a great opportunity because it's not a market that's easily imported. The food and beverage, particularly fresh food stuff here, is a real opportunity for organisations to do that really well and digitise what they do. And by that I mean getting rid of paper and being able to get the information that people on the factory floor and operationally need at the right time, in the right way, at the right frequency, so they can make good decisions.
Yeah. We've probably already covered. We've very much, covered a lot of things here already. But maybe you could share some of your insights on what made you embark on the smart factory journey. Like, what was was there a passion behind it? Was it just you were just doing it? What was the?
So in that job in Thailand, after the factory was finished, they needed some people to stay back to handhold for 3 months. And I'd already enjoyed the coaching and training space, so I stayed back for 3 months. But I got a bit bored because the factory was running really well. And I'd heard there was a rumour of a way that it was a blast furnace called a cupola that was melting rock to produce slag wool. Or rock wool, which is an insulating material. And there'd been a rumour for some time around the world that you could monitor the rate at which this thing melted its rock in kilos per hour based on the amount of current that was coming from a series of motors on which the lava would fall and be spun like candy floss. And I had nothing else to do, and I had access to some current from these motors, the amps they were drawing, so I sat down and had some fun with the PLC, and I managed to prove that there was actually a correlation between the two. And what it meant was when the cupola was melting heavy, the line had to run a little bit quicker to maintain the density, and when it was running a little bit colder, it had to run a little bit slower to maintain the density. And this factory had a $400,000 density variance in its budget to throw away underweight and overweight product. What I showed was that by monitoring the current from these motors in a fairly interesting way and trending that, I could show the cycling of this cupola over hours from high melt to low melt. And then by being able to predict based on the current what the cupola was melting, I was able to automatically feed that upstream to the factory to change the line speed.
Very nice.
And in doing that, we actually got rid of the entire $400,000 density variance for that year. That was my first taste of going, wow, there's gold in them their hills.
Did you patent that technology and then roll it out to the rest of the world, or?
No, but it was great to be a sort of world first in that and show
Yes.
that this theory was actually true and that we could end up with the result that yielded significant benefits back to the business. And then the Coca-Cola facility was done in 2011, and then I did Australia's first purpose-built ready mill factory in 2015, which has gone on from strength to strength and now produces probably 800,000 ready meals a week.
Brilliant.
For Woolies and the like. So same technology. It's a smart factory, fully integrated from its ERP system down through integration hub, out to all the factory floor systems, and it's real time.
Fantastic.
No paperwork.
Yes. No. There's clipboards and people filling in and entering it into the system. 2 days later, getting a report. That's what you have to get rid of.
Yeah, it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
And I have a mission to kill Excel. on the factory floor.
Fair enough too. I used to do my SCADA in Excel. I used to be able to embed live data in an Excel spreadsheet and then have that come up as your cheap, nasty SCADA back in the 1990s. Yeah, it was.
Well, I've challenged
a bit of fun.
I've challenged a few customers and said, look, just do me a favour, go out and ask your people via email how many different spreadsheets do they touch per week and how many hours do they spend in those spreadsheets every week. Be brave. And take a seat when they give you the answer.
Double it when they say it, because they probably don't remember half of them themselves. Yeah.
And sadly, it's become the tool that people use because there's nothing else for them to use. I was with a client a few months ago doing some interviews for what I call my readiness assessment, where I assess the maturity of the organisation to go on the Industry 4 digital transformation journey. And I've got some tools that I use to do that assessment and some benchmarking. And this guy said to me, well, I come to work, I log on to 6 different systems with 10-digit passwords that I'm not allowed to write down, if I get one of them wrong, 3 times, I then have to go to IT and put a ticket in. And he said, I get all this stuff out of the systems and I mash that up through flat files and CSVs and whatever into an Excel spreadsheet. And then by lunchtime, I can do a graph that shows me I'm where I'm meant to be.
Yes.
And he does that 5 days a week.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
And I just shoot me now, it's...
Sounds utterly depressing.
Yeah. Why isn't that man coming in, or the employee coming in, he or she coming into work, and there's a dashboard, and the dashboard shows green dials, orange dials, and red dials, and he goes, that's what I need to focus on today.
Yeah. And is that probably because people don't know where to start to create some of those
they have
solutions?
This particular company is a classic case of a very disparate manufacturing landscape. They have an ERP. They have multiple systems on the factory floor that don't talk to each other seamlessly. So it's export to one and import into the other. OHS systems, monitoring systems, SCADA systems, historians, all those bits and pieces, but they're not in an integrated form.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And therein, in my view, lies the problem.
One of many, I think. Maybe you can share with us a little bit about what are some of the most common misunderstandings you encounter when you hear people talk about Industry 4.0 and you're trying to educate them and people go, oh, we know what that is, or we're already doing that. What's the common thing you find that is...
And your frustrations as well.
Yeah, to go with that.
Go for it.
Just thanks.
Where do you
Let's
start?
open the gate. How long we got?
Sit back. Get comfortable.
How long we got? I'll preface that by a classic situation when I was reaching out on LinkedIn a couple of years ago, and I targeted some food and beverage businesses that I thought could benefit from my skills and my knowledge and experience. And I wrote to a guy who was the head of a franchise, and I asked him, do you make all the stuff for your franchisees in one central location? He said, as a matter of fact, we do. I said, if you're making a lot of stuff in the food and beverage area, you could really benefit from this Industry 4.0. And his response to me was, never heard of it, sounds gimmicky. So I was like, oh, okay, I have an education job to do here. And he absolutely wasn't interested. So the challenges that I see out there is that most people don't know Industry 1.0, which is the Industrial Revolution in 1784, which is James Watt and the steam engine. Yep. Then 1870 was the electrification piece. And the start of the production line, Model T Ford and all that sort of stuff. Industry 3.0 is supposed to have started around 1969 when Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, the advent of electronics. And then the Germans, Germany coined the term Industry 4.0 in 2011, believing that the convergence of 3 technology sets would herald a new era of manufacturing. And that was the use of cloud, the use of IoT, or Industrial Internet of Things as well, and the use of networking. And because cloud has become ubiquitous, networking has become ubiquitous, the ability to mine and get data is easy to do now, and the enabling the edges, it's called the IoT or the IoT, has also become much more prevalent. Because there are organisations out there selling platforms and people don't know what they want and don't even understand what Industry 4 is, they're reluctant to step in. And sometimes other organisations have stepped in and been severely burnt because they haven't got the return on investment that they wanted. My view is that, and reminds me of a call I was on not that long ago where an organisation, the Executive General Manager of Operational Excellence, 15 minutes into a phone call or a Zoom call, Teams call actually, was saying, when I was talking about digital transformation and the benefits that it can yield, he said to me, oh, you're not convincing me that this is a journey we need to take. And I went, whoa, hang on a minute here. And I said to him point blank, I'm sorry, but I'm not here to convince you of anything. If your leadership of your organisation, your board, your directorship is not giving you the mandate and the direction to go on the digital transformation path, I have no vested interest either way. If you want to do it, I can help you. If you don't want to do it, it's not my problem.
Yeah, exactly.
See you later. Have a nice life politely.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the problem, is that the initial barrier to entry here is the lack of leadership. Organisations, generally the leadership doesn't want to know. And often the leadership of certainly the larger manufacturing companies that we know of don't come from a technical background, and I understand why. but they tend to be far more CFO, CIO centric. I do see in America, for example, there are VPs of manufacturing everywhere. In Australia, there are very few, and there are very few COOs that sit at that C-suite level. A COO will often report into a CFO. A CIO might even report into a CFO. And so we have that gap here where, as you said before, Patrick, the very organisation that makes the product that they sell, that makes the money, that pays everybody's wages, is often seen as a poor cousin and a black hole that, you know, money is invested into, and yet there's always plenty of money for the IT systems and the cybersecurity and all the other aspects of the business.
Yeah.
And I think we've lost focus in Australia on the importance of manufacturing to our economy. We've gone from 14% contribution to GDP to just on 6%. And we've lost a huge amount of, I think the car industry exit cost something like 80,000 trade positions, jobs in that sector, both upstream and downstream from the car industry. So
the car industry is a very interesting and passionate topic for me as well, because we used to do quite a bit of work in there.
I remember you saying about this actually.
Yes.
Constantly.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I do repeat myself.
Please go for it.
But when we were working there, you could see why the car industry was going to suffer, and every time the government gave the car industry money, that money went offshore, as opposed to when they didn't give them money, then they would come to people like ourselves and local integrators who had smart ideas and were doing clever things. But if the money came from the government, then for example, the head office in America would say, oh well, no, you've got to use our American systems because that's what we deem you have to use. Whereas if there was no money, then they would locally go, oh, we get some local people to come up with a cool new solution, which quite often I think we can be very competitive when it comes to innovative solutions compared to what Americans have. Even Fisher & Paykel, when they used to build machines for companies in America, would have to kind of dumb it down a little bit. They'd say, oh, we want everything push buttons and conduit and no touch screens and all that kind of stuff that Fisher & Paykel had already been using for years in their system. So it was interesting that for me the car industry, you could see the writing on the wall, and I always used to say to people, what about your children? Where are they going to work when they leave school? If you don't look after your local industry, manufacturing is a big part of that.
Well, on the World Economic Forum's top 100 countries in terms of manufacturing leadership and complexity, Australia sits 68th of the 100.
Of the 100.
So we're well down the food chain.
Yes.
And it's because we dig stuff up primarily and send it overseas and then buy it back with a value add.
Yeah.
And we also export, people that are smart here and innovative that then want to get a start, tend not to. I put an article out on LinkedIn last week, and it was me trying to explain why Australia needs an energy policy, for example. What's happened in the UK is that through the Christmas period, energy's become so expensive that UK residents have had to make a decision to eat or heat.
Yeah. I'm British, and I hear about this a lot, about the economy as a whole over there, and we're going back into another recession. I mean, we talk about recessions over here, but in comparison to America and England, for instance, it's non-comparable at all, and the costs over there are astronomical. I mean, it's expensive here, but England's really suffering.
So what's happened there is there's been a wholesale export of manufacturing. So Britain is now on target to meet its net zero targets, not because of a lack of reduction in usage because of green policy, but a lack of reduction in usage because manufacturing can't afford to buy the energy that it needs to make stuff, so they've exported. And all they've done is they're now using diesel ships to move whatever it was needed to where it needs to be made. Then it's made in coal-fired power stations.
Yeah, somewhere else.
somewhere else, when it would have been made under LPG at a much lower greenhouse gas cost. Yeah. So it's actually costing more to the planet to outsource that to a third world or second world, Eastern European or Southeast Asian country than it is to actually make it in the UK in the first place.
Where often their emissions are way worse again, so it can be.
It's fascinating when you see what Europe's doing in comparison to where we should be as a country. It's just profound.
Well, we'll do the same thing. That's
Eventually.
my concern. We'll end up.
Yeah.
Manufacturing will become so expensive here that we will do the same. And hence my article on LinkedIn last week is why we need an energy policy, so manufacturers know. I heard of a case. As soon as I published that, I end up Dig Howard, who's the CEO of Cochlear, put an article out about the barriers to entry in Australia, that there's very little R&D incentive, 3%, whatever it is, but he talks about the barriers to entry through regulation and government red tape, effectively, to become productive here. That's one issue. But I heard of a story only last week where a company in Sydney that was willing to expand looked at a premises in Wetherill Park in southwestern Sydney, which is an industrial hub, but because it's predominantly warehousing, he was going to have to pay $100,000 to get power, sufficient power, to run his business. So he ended up having to find a new premises closer to the Sydney airport, which is a terrible place to try and get to because of traffic.
Terrible, yeah.
But it was the only place he could find that actually had the power that he needed because of the requirements, because there was the infrastructure to deliver the power to him simply wasn't in place.
Now, I hear a lot of complaints. So I work for a couple of associations in engineering, and some of the complaints I hear is it's probably a touchy subject as well, by the way, but
don't divulge information.
But there's gas that want to try and change and push things forward for this climate change. They want to go into the hydropower, that touchy subject that we keep referring to, and it's the government, it's the infrastructure that's actually dragging their feet, but it's corporates actually do want to push things forward. So it's, we do need the support, we do need the infrastructure and the government policies, what have you, to move forward, and let's catch up to the rest of the world, It's frightful, really, to be honest with you.
As Donald Horne called us the lucky country back in 1964 when he wrote his book, and I've got a few paragraphs on that in some of the articles that I've written, and we're going to run out of luck. Well, let me rephrase that. Our luck is running out.
Yeah.
On the world stage.
Not if we have our weight on, then we push forward.
Shake the tree.
Shake the tree.
100%.
So I guess on that topic would be a good time maybe to give us maybe some ideas that, if manufacturers do want to start on this kind of journey, and, if they do want to be relevant in
efficient, sustainable.
Yeah, exactly. If they want to be around,
push
still,
forward.
What sort of advice would you give people? Like, where should they start? What should they?
Get educated first. Understand what Industry 4 is and isn't. What does digital transformation actually mean? How can you apply that to your business? Are you change ready? Are you fit for the journey ahead? I can certainly tell when a company's standing at base camp in shorts and thongs that it's not going to climb Everest. And I can coach and mentor and equip them to be able to do that. It's always fascinating to me that I developed last year a 4-tiered engagement model, which I produced publicly to share with organisations who might be interested on that journey. Step 1 of which is free. And no one yet has taken me up on it.
Really?
Yep.
What is that step?
Keynote.
Okay.
45 minute, done via Zoom, for an organisation, for them to understand what Industry 4 is and isn't, what digital transformation means, and where the opportunity lies for them in the future.
Yep.
If they like the cut of my jib and what I have to say, then I will go into their organisation and run a half or 1 day workshop for a fee. If they like that, and that gives me access to the operational level, where usually the operational guys and girls know exactly what needs to be done. If they like that, the next step is to go up to the C-suite, where I do my readiness assessment, and that's a series of 1-hour interviews, private and confidential, with the C-suite and below, senior leadership in other words, who then tell me what they believe is going on in the organisation and where it needs to evolve. So I get a chance to tease out for them what is their vision for the business. Sometimes they don't have one, which is a bit of a worry. But that also gives me a view of the alignment between what the factory floor operational people know needs to happen and what the leadership thinks needs to happen.
Interesting.
So I can look then for areas of alignment.
Yeah.
And out of that, I will develop a top 10 things that the organisation could do to prepare and start its journey. And then the level 4 of that, if they need help, is I'll engage with them for 2 to 8 hours a week, depending on what they have in terms of their budget. But usually those engagements don't go over 30 or 40 grand for an entire year. so they get access to my experience and the people that I know out in the marketplace that can support their journey, and hold their hand and coach and mentor them and get an internal cross-functional team in place, and educate them to the point that then after 12 months I usually get off the bus and now they're set up and they're on their own and they can do their own path. And that first step, interestingly enough, I've published this multiple times on LinkedIn for manufacturing organisations and broadcast this to various organisations, and yet still no one is prepared to take me up on that free offer, which I find astounding.
If Germany only has 4% uptake on this, then how... and Australia only has 1%, there's a long way to go. Yeah, there's a lot of... I don't know. I'm actually really surprised when you said that Germany has 4%. So
that's Siemens' estimate. I don't know whether anybody really knows. Yeah. And I mean, what does it mean to be on the Industry 4.0
Well,
journey?
exactly as well. Yep.
Most organisations in Australia haven't closed out Industry 3.0 yet, which is about connectivity and computerisation.
Yeah. And again, I would argue that Fisher & Paykel was probably on the 4.0 bandwagon well before that even was a coined phrase. Yep. So that's one of the other things. Yeah.
I mean, I'll give you, just quickly, I think the original question that started this session or this section was, what are the barriers for organisations? And a lot of manufacturers think that Industry 4.0 is this massive, expensive, grand journey.
I was going to bring this up, actually. I wanted to ask you this question.
Yeah, that they've got to go on, and it's actually not. If there's anybody out in podcast land listening to this who understands food and beverage, you'll know that at the end of a manufacturing line, you'll have a piece of kit called a check weigher. It weighs jars and packs of food and everything that goes across to make sure they're within a certain weight range. If you have to go down to that check weigher and program it, that's Industry 3.0. There's a computer sitting on a piece of kit somewhere in the factory and it may not be networked. The moment you network that piece of equipment and you can abstract the information from it and put it somewhere else away from the machine is step one of Industry 4.0. It is the seeing component, to be able to see remotely from the equipment what's going on the equipment. Let's assume we're making a 500-gram jar of coffee. In order for the check weigher to know whether the coffee is overweight or underweight, it has to have a standard, and the standard is 500-gram jar. If when we extract that information, we can then compare that to a standard that might come from another system like an ERP system, SAP or whatever it is, we now can compare the value that we're getting against the standard.
Yep.
So we're now doing the contextualisation piece. So liken this to a vehicle. You're driving on your car, the speedo shows you're doing 60 kilometres an hour, that's the C piece. But whether you're on the motorway or in a school zone is the context. Because doing 60 in a school zone will give you a different outcome to doing 60 on the motorway.
Expensive outcome.
Well, on the motorway is an abusive outcome.
Yes. Yes.
So that's the second step, is the contextualisation, and that means we now take the data that we're seeing and compare it to some standard remote from the piece of equipment. The third step is saying, well, okay, I'm now making my coffee jars and I'm measuring those coffee jars and I'm using a proper statistical process control, SPC sampling regime, and I'm showing that my jars are within specification, the natural variation in the SPC chart. Suddenly I can see now that the SPC chart is showing me that my weights are going north and I'm about to go out of specification and I'm going to start making reject product. That's the predicting piece. So I know that I'm going to start making product out of spec. So I can then send notification to someone who cares to go and make an adjustment to the filling process to bring it back into control. That's step 3, which is the predicting piece. Step 4, which is the holy grail, which is where the machine learning and AI pieces come in, is the ability then to go, oh, look, for the machine learning engine to go, oh, I can see I'm about to go out of specification or I'm heading towards a specification limit. I will now feed back to the control system. So this is the first time we close the loop, feed back to the control system to automatically adjust. So the process is adapting and optimising of its own accord without human intervention.
Right.
So that's how we can apply Industry 4.0 to a single piece of equipment, like a check weigher on a filling line, and not have to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in a journey that takes months, when we can apply that just to one single piece of equipment.
Yeah, and when you put it like that, John, it actually sounds very logical and actually
very feasible, doesn't it? Really,
not very
small scale,
difficult. It's more knowing that that's what Industry 4.0 is, everything else makes sense around it. Like, of course, you don't want to be filling it with too much coffee, and you don't want to be filling it with too little coffee, because nobody's going to be happy. But and indeed, control systems can do that. Sleeping while they're sleeping. It's easy.
Well, an anecdotal.
But somebody has to put it in.
Anecdotal story is I used to buy a particular pasta, and being a single dad at one stage in my life, I would weigh it out of the 500-gram container for me and my two sons, because we wouldn't eat 500 grams. So I'd put this thing on the scale, and this 500-gram pack, I did this probably at least 6 or 7 times over a period of a few months. This 500-gram pack was 560 grams, 540 grams, 580 grams. And I'm thinking, if only the maker of that pasta knew that they're giving more than 10% away in every pack as giveaway. So every 11th pack could effectively be free in terms of their manufacturing. Yeah. But because they didn't know and probably didn't care. I actually reached out to that company, couldn't get past first base.
Wow. I'm surprised you were going to let them know that you were getting extra pasta.
Well, potential client.
No, that's a good point, yes.
Maybe it's nice to know that which I think I brought as well in the past, is that you can integrate smart factory and a slow journey. It doesn't have to be a complete overhaul, which is something we've discussed about code assist and things like that, which is a whole new topic. Don't get too excited about.
No.
Just not yet.
I think what I get out of this is the whole education side, and that's gonna that topic is going to come up in these podcasts all over the place with Industry 4.0. Obviously, people understanding what it is, that's a huge thing. But yeah, I think education in so many different areas, we're going to have topics on that in our podcast all over.
Well, what's staggering is there are very, very, very few few manufacturing organisations that actually have a 3 to 5 year strategic plan as to how they're going to implement digital transformation in their business. It just doesn't exist. And they don't want to think about it.
Scary. And they may not be around for much longer. Who knows?
I used to think it was called ostrichitis.
Yes.
But it's emuitis in Australia.
Fair enough.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Glenn.
Good work, Glenn. I'm glad you managed to get something in there.
He loves his little toys, doesn't he? Brilliant.
John, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks, John.
As I already told these guys, we need to get John on the show. First on the show. Yeah. He's done the podcast before. His story is great. His message is great, and it's what I keep saying Australia needs, and not just Australia, New Zealand as well, please. But so I appreciate you coming on and
thank you.
And being patient with us while we learn the ropes.
Thanks for the opportunity. Been a great conversation once again.
Fascinating. Thank you so much, John.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You wait till the other conversations we can have.
Can't wait.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers. Bye.
You've been listening to the Industry X.0 Unplugged podcast. Find us on Spotify and subscribe for new episodes.